She began to push intellectual boundaries and explore new intersections and examine masterfully how judiciary can support all stories. I'm much grateful to my good friend Ferdinand Gomes, he is director of Albert College of Engineering, who enthusiastically welcomed my request to host this symposium. The generosity went beyond just providing facilities. In a true Goan's hospitality, he said, I also provide you a chai pan. Thank you very much, Shakir. Also, I'm very grateful to Dada Masuka. See here. She's the one who made everything possible with the microphones, with the chairs, and everything else. She behind the scenes to make it very smooth. Thank you very much, I'm much grateful to Dr. Volmaz Pereira, professor at Joseph Bas College, Dr. Sangeeta Sonak, director of Center for Environment and Natural Resources, Dr. Helga Rosario Gomes of Columbia University in New York, for mentoring Dr. Sweta Sinha. Much grateful to Advocate Albertina Almeida, our committed advocate activist, who compels the powers to be to think and act about the greater good of people. And of course, we all know it's not an easy task. Her task today as a moderator is to unpack the complexities of ecofeminism and get us to think and to keep exploring the significance of this scholarship in the juridical field. We owe today our gratitude to Professor Shavi of the Sagamkar Law College for seeing this symposium as a valuable contribution to the juridical field. Although he is not here at the moment because of some conflicting commitments he has. And we value his sponsorship of this symposium, and we look forward for further collaboration with Sagamkar College of Law. Also, special thanks to Dr. Elsa Fernandez of Goenche Pudle Katir, and for teaming up with us. We too, like the Pudli Pilgrim, share our dreams for a better future. Thank you everyone for taking the time to spend with us. And I want to acknowledge the presence of His Honorable Retired Justice Sin, who is with us. Thank you very much for joining us. So I want to thank the foundation, the Goa Foundation, and particularly Dr. Claude Alvarez. He may not know that we are reading his stuff behind his back. And for this study that Dr. Sinha undertook, which is uniquely based on the diligent and assiduous work over the years the Goa Foundation has done. So now I would like to invite Dr. Volmaz.
Saudhatum Gandhi Ubari. A very good evening, and for us all Goans, this is siesta time, and it's so kind of you to be here at this time, and it is just siesta time. I'm privileged to just give a short introduction to this symposium, which we have called as Environmental Symposium, and the topic is before you: Gender, Environmental Justice and Ecofeminism in Goa, India. And we look forward to the presentation by Dr. Sweta himself. All of us are waiting eagerly. And as we do this, I would like to acknowledge the presence of our chief guest today, Dr. Claude Alvarez, and I invite you, Dr. Claude Alvarez, to please come and take this position only for a short time. It is just 10 minutes maximum. Here is a man who has Goa in his heart, in his mind, in his life, and everywhere it is Goa. So we welcome Dr. Claude Alvarez. Today's session has also been, we have Goenche Pudle Katir with us in this venture. I invite Dr. Elsa on behalf of Goinche Pulle Pirge Katir to be here. Well, Salgaonkar College of Law is also part of this venture, and due to the reasons just mentioned, he or they cannot be present right now. But we acknowledge their contribution in this particular environmental symposium. And just a floral welcome to all these great people sitting on the dais. I request the members of Chikali Youth Farmers Club to present the floral bouquets. The first one to our chief guest of the day, Dr. Claude Alvarez. Well, this study has been done from her heart by Dr. Sweta. And Dr. Sweta, originally born in Nagpur. Originally from Nagpur, and for last 12 years, her parents, who are professionals, I would like to say retired, but they are the professionals who have been staying in Goa for last 12 years. So this particular study has something to heart. That is, Goa is at her heart. I request you to welcome Dr. Sweta with a floral bouquet. Dr. Sweta has been guided by Anis Goenka. Anis Goenka, Father Basilio Monteiro, professor at St. John's University, New York. I welcome wholeheartedly the Anis Goenka over here, who is working in the United States and yet has Goa at his heart, so that whatever is being done in Goa for the sake of Goa is being closely watched and observed by him. We welcome you, Professor Basilio. Now today's session will be moderated by none other than Advocate Albertina Almeida. There's a long list that I can talk about her, but today I will keep it reserved. Only one thing that I would say is she is a PhD in matrimonial property rights of women under family laws of Goa. She is also part of many organizations which work towards the marginalized, which work for women, and which work for environment. And I welcome Advocate Albertina to moderate this session. Welcome with a floral vase. Well, there are many activists in Goa today who work for Goa, who cry for Goa. त्यांचे काळीज गोंयचेर आहा. गोवा म्हणल्यार कितें तरी जाता भितर. आयज सगळे गोडे हांगासर ना, not all the organizations, but today all the activists are represented by one organization, I can say, गोंयचे फुडले पिळगे खातीर. And although we have the eminent people from गोंयचे फुडले पिळगे खातीर, including the president, Jack, and also others, I welcome the entire Goinche Pulle Pirge Katir, who is supporting this study to be disseminated to everybody through Dr. Elsa. I welcome Dr. Elsa and entire Goinche Pulle Pirge Katir team to this event. Elsa belongs to many other groups as well. So, and most of us over here are belonging to many groups, not just one group. And all these groups have only one thing in their heart, that is Goa. So, from here, I invite Dr. Sweta to take over. Before that, okay, Maka diuche paile, I would just like to tell you how this session will go about. We are finished with the introductory session. No more introductions. Now Dr. Sweta will present her study before us using the PowerPoint. Let us be attentive, let us be awake. Of course, this is siesta time, but I am sure she will keep us awake. And we have Advocate Albertina moderating this session. Soon after she finishes, we have a time to interact, which Advocate Albertina will tell us how it will go. And once that is done, we will have the person or the Nils Goinkar who has done so many things for Goa, and he has been studied, his work has been studied. First response from him, let us be ready to hear that response. And also, Advocate Albertina will allow us to put some questions, interact, and then Dr. Elsa, on behalf of Vanchipulli Birge Katir and also Salgaonkar College of Law, will provide us with the concluding remarks. And since Chai Pani has been prepared for us by Pada Agnel, Ashram Padre Possessão Engineering College, Pada Agnel, we will have the snacks and the chai pani, and then we will proceed home with all that we get over here and try to disseminate to others.
Yes, please. Let Dr. Sinha
Please give some flowers to me.
Let Dr. Sinha
Now I request all our guests to please take the place in the audience. And over to Dr. Sweta Sinha. She has, okay, last one thing. She is in Goa. I have said she is from Nagpur, originally from Nagpur, but today I say that she is a Nils Goinkar once again for taking this topic, and that also far away in the US, in New York. She has traveled all over India and all over the world for her studies. She has gone to the UK, to the United States, and here she is with Goa, presenting to us the Goa that we love.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon to you.
Thank you so much for coming. It's indeed an honor and a privilege to be here amongst all of you and to have the opportunity to present my work, which is very, very close to my heart. Very few academicians who embark on a PhD journey actually get to see their work talked about, get to talk about their work to such an illustrious, esteemed audience, and for that I'm eternally grateful. I'm also grateful to everyone that got together and helped us put this together. And before I sort of start with the presentation, I think it's important for me to give some context regarding what it is, or more importantly, what it is not. This is a communication-based study. It's a multi-sector communication-based study. And that means that my expertise lies in looking at different fields, finding the interconnectedness between those fields, and weaving those narratives together to reveal to you an insight that my research has led me to. I am not an expert in law, I am not an expert in environmental science, and I am definitely not an expert in activism on ground myself, which is why I am extremely humbled to have the experts in the audience so that you will know exactly how to take this study forward and use your expertise and infuse it with the kind of nuance that each field's expertise requires. With that, I think I will, without further ado, start the presentation. I think it has gone to sleep since it's siesta time. The laptop needs waking up too. Yeah. Can I try? Oh. So the way that I have tried to organize this presentation is such that I should be able to briefly introduce everyone here to the concepts that have been used to undertake this study, to analyze and sort of unpack the very crux of this study. Without understanding those concepts, it will be very difficult to fully comprehend exactly how the study has been conducted and what it sort of represents. So I will begin first by talking about the key concepts and introducing you all, and then taking everyone through the methodology through which the study was conducted. That shall also be brief because, as you can understand, this is years of work compressed into an hour's presentation. So I will do my best to touch upon as many important aspects as are possible. But please feel free to approach me. I can share my email address later if there are follow-up questions. My study will soon also be available online for anybody to access and read. So if a few parts seem like they are not comprehensively explored in the presentation, I can certainly assure you that they have been comprehensively explored in the dissertation. And whenever you have access to the dissertation, you will get to know all those details. And whatever doubts you may have, I will be happy to answer them in person or after the session. I think it doesn't like me.
I'll be here.
About that, Father. Yeah. So to introduce you to my study outline, as it says, the aim of the study was to examine whether the juridical field of environmental law in India, especially Goa, is, because the study was done based on Goa, whether it is gendered, and this has been done through an eco-feminist lens. Again, before proceeding forward, like I said, I am neither a legal analyst nor a legal scholar, by no means a legal expert. So the outcomes that I have discussed are in no way meant to be a criticism of either the judiciary or any of the lawyers or any of the processes. It's merely a critique on the inadequacy of the systems that we have today that have made it very difficult to on ground address some of the very real palpable issues that the city faces, that women face today in the name of environmental crisis. So with that in mind, I will go ahead and introduce you to some of those lacunae or some of those limitations that exist in the way that the present systems of power have been set up. And if we can all, put our minds together and figure out how we can make the systems better so that the outcomes are better. It's merely done from that perspective, not from the criticism of an institution or the criticism of any individual that has been spoken about in the study. The juridical field as a concept has been defined through the French sociologist Pierre Bourdieu's framework. A total of 17 legal cases, which are judgments, the judgments of 17 civil legal cases, which are regarding environmental disputes in Goa, have been used. And it is the study of those 17 cases that have, acted as media text for me to analyze and to come up with my analysis and my conclusions that I have drawn. All of the parties, amongst all the 17 cases, the common thread that binds them together is the fact that one of the parties involved in the dispute was Goa Foundation. And that is because I'm looking at how institutions of power sort of result in either creating or maintaining the power dynamics that exist in society. And it was supposed to be an analysis of how power works amongst institutions and not individuals, which is why an institution was picked up, and it had to be Goa Foundation because of the amount of work and the number of years that Goa Foundation has put into this field. that it was glaringly obvious that it could not have been anyone else, since my study starts from the 80s and goes on to using cases till now. So in all of the cases, Goa Foundation has been one of the two parties. We'll begin with the key concepts first. So when we say this has been done through an ecofeminist lens, I think it's very important for us to first parse the understanding of ecofeminism in its most basic form. Ecofeminism is the idea that the crisis that the environment faces today and women's crisis and marginalization of women both share a common oppressor, and the oppressor is the system of capitalist patriarchy. Patriarchy and capitalism feed into one another and are together responsible for environmental devastation, concomitantly also disproportionately impacting women compared to men or any other gender. They disproportionately impact women more, and there is very little that is usually spoken about or acknowledged about through this framework when crises around the environment are spoken about. So the basis of ecofeminism lies in critically analyzing the intersections of different fields and powers and how capitalism and patriarchy together impact the environment while differentially impacting women. The term ecofeminism was coined by Françoise Dubon. She wrote a book called Feminism or Death. She was a French radical feminist, and she argued that looking at the way that the world is going with capitalism and patriarchy entrenched, she argued that improving the status of women globally was imperative for not just the betterment of the planet, but the very survival of the planet. The survival of the planet itself is in jeopardy if attention is not paid to improving the status of women globally, because the status of women globally is very intrinsically and strongly linked to the environment and vice versa. The exploitation of women and all other marginalized groups, so for example, people of color, children, economically weaker sections of society, if we go back enough to see the nexus or the source of origin of all of these problems, we will understand how patriarchal oppression is responsible for somewhere resulting in the marginalization of the oppressed and for environmental crisis. Now, why do we need ecofeminism in India? Why is it that capitalistic patriarchy is even an issue that we need to talk about or to keep in mind? When we say that capitalistic patriarchy disproportionately affects women, which women are we talking about and how? So there is an entire analysis on how it affects urban women. So for example, over the years it has been sort of noted that there has been a definitive reproductive decline amongst women that are living in urban areas that are exposed to pollution. There is definitely a voluntary decline in reproduction. The number of women globally, including in the metros and urban cities in India, talking about voluntarily choosing not to procreate because the future of the world, the future of our one planet Earth, lies in doldrums right now because of the fear of what the environmental crisis will bring. But I would like to keep that aspect aside because my study focuses on Goa, and the women that are impacted the most are the ones that are usually either marginalized or from the rural communities, which is why a greater focus in my study is also on why ecofeminism is required, especially for the marginalized and rural women who are actually affected much more than their urban counterparts. To begin with, when there is, because in the name of capitalism and development, there is a lot of loss of biodiversity that is caused due to deforestation, that is caused due to infrastructure and tourism development, and all of that kind of ends up reducing the number of man hours of employment for women who work in these forests or in these coastal areas and whose livelihood depends on the very areas that are being demolished and destroyed in the name of development. There is voluntary reproductive loss due to need to work more hours. There are villages in the northeast where women actually have a voluntary hysterectomy done so that they don't lose those 2 or 3 days of the month when they have their menstrual cycle, and they don't lose their ability to earn in those days. With increasing amount of heat, with increasing amount of temperatures, and considering the huge percentage of women in India who work in the agricultural field, it's becoming very difficult for them to cope with the climate situation and the climate conditions. There is lowering of the water table. Now, especially in villages, and based on my study in Goa, it's the women who are primarily responsible for fetching water. And the more the water table gets lowered because of environmental pollution, which is directly caused by indiscriminate development, it results in these women having to walk farther and farther distances to actually get the water. So not only is it physically more taxing for them, not only is it more time consuming, but it's also something that women have to bear the burden of, and instead of the men in the society. Water pollution and toxins increase incidences of breast cancer and health hazards, which again disproportionately impact women that are living alongside the riverbanks in rural areas. Because of farmer suicides, the entire burden of the family ends up getting transferred onto women who, in addition to taking care of the family and the children, have to also become the primary earning members for the family. Like I said, marginalized women are the ones that are affected worse, since although officially, legally, the caste-based discrimination has been eliminated, but there are parts of the country where the practice is still very much there. And in such places, the women who don't even have access to wells, to public wells and to public amenities, have to go even farther distances to get their basic everyday needs met, their needs and their families' needs. Which is why it's very crucial to sort of look at things from an ecofeminist perspective, because if we don't anymore, the gender disparity will keep increasing proportionately as the environmental crisis continue to keep getting worse. What are the origins of Indian ecofeminism? So even though the coinage and the term is relatively new, ecofeminism, for us Indians, it's not a new concept or an idea. The name may be new, but it's always been something that we have pioneered. Whether we look at the Chipko movement in the Garhwal region of the Himalayas, where it was mainly women who surrounded the trees, it was led by Gaura Devi. And this was against the loggers. The government had allowed the loggers to come and cause massive deforestation, which was resulting in floods and environmental crisis. And it was the women who were at the forefront of the movement, who went and hugged trees and made sure that they were able to stop that kind of indiscriminate deforestation from happening. Similarly, when it was the Narmada Bachao Andolan, there was Medha Patkar who was at the forefront of it. We have Indian ecofeminists who have done a lot of work in trying to unpack these legal and environmental and gender intersections of this particular issue. We have Beena Agrawal, who has spoken about how it is very important for women to have a greater bargaining power and a greater representation in policy making regarding the environment. They have a bigger say in the ways in which policies are framed or acts are written, or even in actually legislation and in being in positions of power where they can make a difference through decision making. We have studies by Jaya Kumari that talks about Kerala, speaks about how in the early 70s Kerala started off as considered a problem state per se, but then with bringing in technology and bringing in education, it helped the state improve in terms of its GDP, in terms of bringing up the quality of life of people, but it did that at the cost of women and at the cost of the environment, because while the development technically helped the state and helped all the men get employed, it relegated women further to the role of childbearing, child rearing, taking care of home, because the employment and the development was done in such a way that it favored the male counterparts to get employment and to become the sort of economy drivers, and the women were relegated to the role of childbearing and taking care of the house, depriving them of any sort of economic agency of their own. In addition to that, it also led to widespread destruction of the environment within Kerala itself. So there is a lot of basis for ecofeminist work that has been done in India, whether it has been called by that name or not. Irrespective of that, ecofeminism has been at the heart of movements regarding the environment in India, where women primarily have been at the forefront. A name that is synonymous with ecofeminism in India is that of Vandana Shiva. Vandana Shiva uses a decolonizing lens where she talks about how not only patriarchy but colonialism has been responsible for destroying the environment and is also responsible for the way in which women have been exploited. She has written and spoken at length about the way in which structural adjustment programs, genetically modified seeds, the Green Revolution has taken agency away from the farmers, leaving them more oppressed. And in the process, there is this notion where we feel like environmental crisis is a technological problem that requires technological solution, instead of looking at it also as a social problem that requires sort of social assimilation into solution making as well. So for example, everyone talks about how reproduction and the growth of population is responsible for the environmental crisis because the earth cannot take any more people. But whom does the responsibility ultimately for reproduction or the lack thereof fall on? It's almost always the women. And it is usually by the Western powers where they mandate that the third world countries or the developing countries that do not even contribute to as much pollution as the developed countries do, they are the ones who should be reducing their population, which doesn't necessarily make sense because the per capita contribution to greenhouse gases by the developed countries is way higher than those in the developing countries. And even the control of population is done through the regulation of women's bodies. Nobody speaks about regulating men or the way men can control population. It ultimately comes to the women. So she has this sort of decolonizing lens where she says that we need to stop depending on Western narratives to tell Indians how they should solve their problem. We need more grassroots level movements. We need more women who actually come forward, take charge, make decisions in order to make this situation better. Now looking at environmental laws and gendering. The environmental laws were definitely not written with the intent of being anti-feminist. They were not written with the intent of purposely leaving women behind. But the consequences of applying those laws tend to have gender differentiated effects. So for example, like I have discussed so far, there is a disproportionate burden with respect to women's physical health, domestic responsibilities, professional responsibilities, and social status. There are certain environmental conservation policies such as restrictions on use of land, or there is a displacement of certain communities for conservation projects which disproportionately impact the women who entirely rely on natural resources for their livelihood, like collecting fuel, they're collecting water. There is a lack of gender sensitivity. So like I said, it is not really, it's benign neglect, if I may call it so. It is not purposeful exclusion of women's agenda, but it's the benign neglect of the impact on women within the environmental policies, because of which there isn't a gender sensitive approach. It doesn't look at women's specific role in acknowledging how important women are to decision making, to resource management, further marginalizing them. Women from marginalized communities who are impacted also have challenges in accessing legal remedies and participating in decision making because of systemic discrimination, because of lack of resources, or in most cases simply cultural barriers where women do not have the means to be able to access legal recourses or legal remedies, just because they never have the exposure to even know how to do it. There are health and safety concerns, like there are environmental hazards, exposure to hazardous substances, pollution, that disproportionately again impact women because of the way that the family structure and the setup is in our country. Women tend to be the ones who are nurturers. They are the ones who take care of the sick in the family. They are the ones who take care of the kids. They are the ones who take care of the house. So when there are health crises being caused by environmental pollution, not only do they affect the women, they also end up increasing the burden on them to take care of the other people at home who are unwell. And these are all things, like Professor Montero always says, the amount of work that women put in every day to make sure that the world keeps turning. It's a real shame that that work is economically unaccounted for. That work never shows up in the GDP. That work is never calculated, and women are never compensated for it. It's just expected that this is their job and they should do it at home. And because of that, again, their burden increases while they have no upside to it. They're not compensated in any way for all the problems that they have to face, because capitalistic patriarchy decides that development should happen in a certain way. There is also the problem of representation versus participation. I've often had people come up to me, especially in India, and say that when you talk about the fact that women are not in the decision-making process, do you realize that we actually have provisions within our law, and we actually have provisions that make reservations for women, and certain percentage of seats are secured for women, and so how can you say that? And I completely acknowledge that a provision is available, but there is a difference between being given representation versus being able to truly participate. To give someone a percentage of seats is to grant them representation, but to actually give them the power to make a change is what true participation is all about. And based on a few studies that have been done, we've seen that while representation has been worked on, participation is a big question mark. There is a study, there are actually multiple studies that have been done. The one in Telangana reveals that 68.76% of women are engaged in active politics because of their husband's coercion. Only 16% entered politics because of self-determination or self-empowerment. In Gujarat, the husbands of elected women are called sarpanch patis. So the woman could be a sarpanch, but it's the sarpanch pati who usually takes the decisions. It's the sarpanch pati who usually decides or becomes like the de facto head, while the woman is just the nominal head. In Madhya Pradesh, there are studies that have talked about how in some of these meetings, they actually ban the male members of the family from showing up, because there have been instances where the male members have not only shown up and spoken at the meeting, but have also taken the oath instead of the women. So, same thing with Odisha, and there are loads of these studies. I've just presented a few snapshots of it. So yes, there is representation, but is there participation is a very big question that we need to ask. Now that we've kind of familiarized ourselves with the concept of ecofeminism, with the nexus between environmental laws and gendering, and how it impacts women, this gets a little technical, so I'll try to be brief about it, and we can discuss it in absolute details and lengths later if you would like me to clarify any of the doubts. So my study was based on, like I said, this French sociologist Pierre Bourdieu's work. It's actually his seminal work called Force of Law, and I absolutely don't need to tell anybody from the legal field what that is about, but for those of us who may be a little unfamiliar, Pierre Bourdieu's work called Force of Law is where he talks about what a juridical field is. Before we go into describing what a juridical field is, let's see what he means by the word field itself. So, according to Bourdieu, our society comprises different fields or different sort of sections, and each section has its own hierarchy of power, has its own way of operating, has its own values, and these sections or fields often overlap. And in this overlap of the fields, you will see that different kinds of capital are constantly being exchanged. To break it down and make it even simpler, there are about 4 kinds of capital. One is economic capital, which is your monetary capacity to buy something, and how your monetary capacity determines how much power or influence you have in a certain field. So in that intersection where different fields overlap, your monetary capacity is a source of power. That is your economic capital. Your cultural capital comes from your education, your skills. If you have been born in a family that has been able to afford to you a good education, that's a privilege that you have in the form of your cultural capital that others may or may not have. So your skills and your education is a form of your cultural capital. There is social capital, which is in the form of the social networks that you form, the kind of connections that you have in society. And lastly, there is symbolic capital. Symbolic capital is in the means of what kind of status or position that you hold. So for example, a police officer, by being called the DIG or the inspector, has certain powers that come with the position. So the authority that you have based on your position in society is symbolized by symbolic power. Lastly, there is the concept of habitus. Now again, to simply put it, habitus talks about how people from within a certain field have the advantages that they all share, and this helps them in perpetuating those advantages to the next generation while keeping the others out. A classic but sort of oversimplified example of habitus is when we talk about the nepotism debate in India, where, or even if I look at it from the US point of view, within the legal and the political system, for example, Harvard Law School, Yale Law School have a lot of influence. Because of that, most people who are lawyers and most people who eventually become decision makers and run countries tend to belong to one of these institutions. And because of the way that the system is set up, it is natural that the more hires that are made within the field are also from Harvard Law School or from Yale Law School. People from Harvard and Yale will give more employment to people from Harvard and Yale. So that's how the representation of certain institutions that have that kind of power becomes overrepresented over time, while others who don't have that kind of access do not get that same kind of representation available to them. And that is the power of habitus, that shared power that you enjoy because you're a part of a certain field. Lastly, and I promise you with this, the background and the basic concepts will all be done and we can actually get into my study. The last concept is that of toponym. So I've been speaking about Bourdieu and how I've used Bourdieu's framework, and Bourdieu's framework is about seeing how power dynamics manifest within a field or within intersections of field. And sometimes this is done by the process of naming, by having the power to name something, by having the power to categorize something. So for example, if we look at toponymy, in our country, most countries, the legal system gets to decide how somebody is called a husband or what entitles a woman to be called a wife. These are legal ideas that have been put forth, and if you want your rights and your, if you want to be represented when there is a crisis, it's very important to follow due judicial process in order to get that. So unless and until you are sort of deemed husband and wife by the courts, by a certain legal process, you do not have the rights that are supposed to come with being a husband or with being a wife. So this naming, calling this husband, calling this person wife, the idea of calling this arrangement a marriage is as much legal as it is social, and that is why courts and systems of power today assert their power through the means of being able to name and categorize people, places, relationships. And toponymy is just that. It is another practice in which power is disseminated through naming things. And my study is about environmental toponyms. So the 17 cases that I have used, in all of those cases, the center of the dispute is an environmental toponym. What do I mean by an environmental toponym? So for example, we understand that a forest is, for a layperson, a forest is a large area with maybe a lot of trees, a lot of animals. But when you look at it from a legal point of view, there is a definition for what a forest is. And which is why when there are legal disputes, usually around a forest area, whether development should be allowed or not, the two parties more or less argue in court about whether this area qualifies as a forest or whether this area doesn't qualify as a forest. So even if it looks like a forest and smells like a forest, legally it may not be a forest if it is not described as a forest in and within those legal parameters. And again, that's the power of toponymy. You can generally call something a forest, but if the court has decided that, or if the legislation has decided that this is the ambit within which something can be considered a forest, then that's what it is, and that is the power. That is the power in being able to name and categorize things that needs to be explored. The Bordusian approach to toponymic disputes, like I said, there are a lot of studies, and in my dissertation, whenever you happen to read it, you will see a lot of cases that I have included from within India, from various parts of the world, using Bourdieu's approach, where toponymic disputes have been looked at and analyzed through this juridical field lens. So for example, if we just look at Bordusian approach to toponymic disputes, there is a study about the South African gated communities where they've spoken about how, when these gated communities come up, how they are named determines how commercially viable they will be, what kind of wealth they will generate. So for example, if it is a very fancy European or exotic sounding name, or if it is associated with something that is associated with nature, then that property, because of its name, will seem like it is much more premium or much more superior, and because of that name itself, it will fetch a much higher sort of premium value. So a lot of times the name of a person, in our cases, surnames. In India, people still ask for surname, and your surname brings a certain kind of power, to you, in the way that the society treats you, in the way that you exert your power in society. And that's why naming becomes very important. If you have, for example, when I spoke about the South African community, naming resulted in increasing the rental price or the sale price or the property value of that place. If Bourdieu were to speak about it, he would say that economic capital was exchanged in return for credibility and power. That is how Bourdieu would say, that people with more money are able to buy into that credibility and power of a fancy place with a fancy name because the fancy name and place enabled the people with economic power to become the entrants into its community, and the ones without economic power were left out. So that's pretty much how Bourdieu would analyze it, I hope. So based on that, like I said, my study has 17 cases, and all of those cases involve toponymic disputes. So in each of those cases, one of the parties has been Goa Foundation, because Goa Foundation, as we all know, has been instrumental in driving climate justice for Goa, environmental and ecological justice for Goa. So in most cases, the cases involve a certain area, forested area, or certain coastal regulatory zone, or a national park, or an eco-sensitive zone being used up for construction or development or mining activity. And Goa Foundation has been the one to approach the courts and talk about how, because this region is supposed to be a reserved region, is a reserved forest, or it is an eco-sensitive zone, that they should not be allowed. While the other party has argued that because of XYZ reason, this is not a forest, this is not an eco-sensitive zone, so construction should be allowed or development should be allowed. Most cases more or less follow this format. And all of these 17 cases are based on Goa. So none of the cases are from outside of Goa, they're all based on Goa. And Goa is a focus of study because I will not make the mistake of trying to tell Goans about their own state. You all know Goa much better than me, so we can skip to the next slide. And so the reason behind Goa was, as during my introduction it was said that my parents are retired and they live here. So naturally there is an emotional connect that I have, and I have a stake in the place myself. Aside from that, the disproportionate exponential growth that Goa has seen in the past few decades, it has really put a lot of burden and pressure on the ecology of the state. And it is increasingly being spoken about. Unlike other states in India, Goa is unique because it wasn't even considered a part as a state of India until the late 80s. It was in 61 that it was made a union territory with Daman and Diu. And it has only been given the status of an integrated state in the late 80s. And in just these last 30-40 years, there has been such exponential growth and development, but that has come with its own adverse effects on the environment and ecology and on women. And that is why Goa was such a apt sort of sample set for me to start this study. The things that I have explored in my study are mainly how mining, tourism and infrastructure development, again, all three results of capitalism and patriarchy, profit-driven activities that are primarily headed by men, are the ones that are responsible for the devastation of the environment and for the state of women in Goa. And these activities are mining, tourism and infrastructure development. So a little history on the mining. We know that since 2007 mining has been banned, then mining has been lifted, then there have been temporary bans, and there have been lifts. As of now, it seems like the latest that I read about, and please correct me or update me if I've got this wrong, but the latest I know is that as of the 12th of Jan 2024, all decks in Goa have been cleared for fresh extraction of iron ore. And the Union Environment Ministries, the EAC, recommended granting environmental clearance to Vedanta Limited, and they are going to extract 3 million tons per annum at Bicholim. And about 9 iron ore mineral blocks across the state in North Goa have been auctioned so far. Have been set up for auction, but so far only Vedanta has secured public hearing. That's the mining situation. As far as tourism and infrastructure development is concerned, because of COVID, there has been a dramatic drop in tourism in Goa. but tourism is still one of the major drivers of economy in the state of Goa, and it contributes to about 18% of Goa's net state domestic product and 14% of total foreign exchange currency that's earned in the country. And again, the latest that I know in terms of tourism is that all new tourist vehicles in Goa are supposed to be electronic vehicles from now. And according to the Chief Minister, Goa ranks 4th in India in terms of percentages of EV purchased. The only problem with that is that globally, we still haven't figured out how to dispose of the electronic waste that is generated. Globally, we still don't know how to ethically mine the lithium and the minerals that are required for the production of these supposedly environmental batteries in the first place. So that's a separate issue, and if we even have the infrastructure that is required for the charging of these cars, there need to be enough charging stations so that this becomes a viable and sustainable option. But we don't really have that kind of infrastructure or those many charging stations where people can effectively make that switch from fuel-based to EV vehicles. And there's a bunch of other ideas and plans that are in motion regarding the development and growth. And there are a bunch of projects that are in motion right now. And again, like these are things that you read in the newspaper here every day. You watch it on news, so you are completely aware of that. So I'll move on further with the focus on my study. Impact of mining on the environment is again something that most people here are aware of. It leaves the natural landscape with pits. There is a lot of waste reject. The waste reject has an impact on agricultural sector in 3 ways. One, it causes soil pollution, and because it causes soil pollution and toxicity, it causes that impact. Second, because mining as an activity requires the clearing of forests, etc. So there is large-scale deforestation that is oftentimes done, which is again an impact. Thirdly, a lot of people look at mining as a lucrative alternative because they have been promised a certain amount of economic benefits. So a lot of labor moves from the agricultural sector to the mining sector, thereby causing an actual deficit within the agricultural sector for the amount of labor. Once again, putting the burden back on women because women do not get as many jobs in mining. And even if they do, there are certain limitations, to put it mildly, which we will discuss later. Like I said, there is soil pollution, there is groundwater pollution. It impacts clam fisheries, the impact on tribal people who live in these areas, these communities that are indiscriminately displaced because areas have to be cleared, areas in which they are dependent on their livelihood for are cleared for the purpose of mining. Again, the impact of mining on women is also palpable in the state. And here's the thing, that it's a double-edged sword. If mining is allowed, then the pollution and all of that caused by mining puts the pressure on women because either they have to take care of family members who keep falling sick because of the dust, or because of the lowering of the water table and women are supposed to fetch water, they have to go long distances, or because of the fact that there is impact of mining dust on the family, or because they are the ones who collect firewood, etc. So again, they are impacted if that area is cleared out. So that ends up putting like a double burden on women. One is the economic burden and the other is the burden of the family. That is if mining is allowed. Now when you start and stop mining and start and stop mining again, it again ends up impacting women because now the men are out of jobs. And there has been an uptick in domestic violence against women, in increasing levels of alcohol and drug consumption amongst people who end up getting unemployed because mining has abruptly been stopped. Once again putting the pressure back on women because husbands are not working, there is domestic violence. So in addition to coping with that, they have to take care of the children, the family, the people who are sick, and go out and find work. And a lot of times these women are pushed into sex work, into work that is menial labor, into work that otherwise by choice a woman would not want to take up. So that's another indirect impact of mining on women. And there is a complete loss of indigenous knowledge and practices, because these communities that live in these forested areas or in these coastal areas that have been cleared out, these communities, especially the women folk of this community, have a lot of deep, rich indigenous knowledge about the plants, about how they can be used, their medicinal purposes, which cannot be formally captured. It's an experience that gets passed down within the communities from women to their children. And once you displace them, all of that wealth of knowledge is lost. All of that entire culture by itself is lost, a culture that's being upheld by women. So that's mining and women. Now if we look at tourism and infrastructure development, again there is mangrove losses, there is loss of marine biodiversity, there is an erosion in sand dunes, there is a decline in the quality of the fish that is caught, there is large-scale deforestation again, the coastal zones are impacted, the way that the fishing communities are impacted because a lot of their areas are being taken up for water sports and for barges and for ships to pass. So the impact, and of course more importantly, the amount of tourism, the pressure of the number of tourists that comes in, a lot of the water that is supposed to be for local use is diverted for the use of tourism. There is a many-fold increase in the waste that is produced, sanitation waste and otherwise, and it's difficult to cope with and find effective waste disposal mechanisms to effectively dispose of that volume of waste. So all of that also ends up impacting the environment. And similarly, it impacts women ultimately. There is loss of livelihood for local women, especially the fisher women and the ones who dry the fish and sell the fish, because their areas have been taken up, so their primary source of income has been taken from them. Tourism has been linked to an influx of drugs and alcohol, and this again impacts women because again increase on drugs and alcohol is directly linked to increase in sexual crimes against women. It is linked to a decrease in the family members' propensity to pursue education. Instead, the young men or the boys in the family are often under the influence of alcohol and drugs, and even managing and maintaining them becomes the responsibility of women. There is the lure of easy money. Because of tourism, young boys start to become, what are they called? Tourist guides. So they end up becoming tourist guides, and because they end up becoming tourist guides and they know that this is quick, easy money, a lot of them choose not to get educated. And that's again a burden that's put on women. So between managing the crisis at home, the economic crisis, the personal crisis, the professional crisis, there is just an indiscriminate amount of disproportionate burden that women face. And it doesn't get spoken about because it is so normalized. It is so normalized that women are the ones that are supposed to be strong, and women are the ones that are supposed to take all of this and bear all of this, and there is somehow some sort of virtue associated with silent suffering. And because of that, even though these things are so common, they are not spoken of. I was quite surprised when I started that this was the first ecofeminist study based on Goa. And the amount of information there is out there, like the potential for research in this is indefinite. So, and also the media portrayal of women as easy. So when there were ads and stuff, and the locals here will know that earlier the tourism industry used ads where they used bikini-clad women, or they used women in sort of a derogatory or degrading manner, which also impacted the ways in which the tourists that would come to Goa would behave with the local women folk. The way that they would act towards the local women folk, the kind of expectations that they would have from the local women, again increasing their susceptibility to sexual crimes and sexual violence. So coming to the study design and methodology, this was a qualitative study. there were 17 cases. I used those 17 cases and they were judgments. So in a judgment, typically the ones in the legal profession have all seen what judgments look like. But for the benefit of those who haven't, the judgments are written down in point form, and each point is one aspect that is addressed. So you have point 1, point 2, point 3, point 4, etc. throughout the judgment. So my first task was to read through the entire judgment, apply Bourdieu's framework of the juridical field, see what are the intersections of power that are happening, who are the players, what are the intersections of power, understand how in each case power is being manifested differently and leading to different sort of outcomes that impact women and the environment simultaneously, but doing that through Bourdieu's lens. So first was using Bourdieu to parse the power dynamics in the field, and then to use an ecofeminist lens to go and see now how does this differentially impact women. So step 1 is Bourdieu's framework, step 2 is using an ecofeminist framework. The details are here, but I'm going to skip the details because otherwise, I'll end up taking a lot of your time. But I am absolutely accessible, so if anybody wants clarifications on these, please feel free to reach out and I'll be very happy to engage in a discussion on the details of my methodology. Like I said, all the cases involved Goa Foundation. They were all regarding a toponymic dispute on these 5 toponyms, whether it was forests, coastal regulatory zone, national park, eco-sensitive zone, and wildlife sanctuary. Of course, there are a lot more cases, hundreds of cases that Goa Foundation has fought, but because the ambit of my study was on looking at cases that are specific on toponymic disputes and these 5 toponyms, it distilled down to about 17 cases. I think we can skip this. So the hypothesis was that through the analysis of the use of environmental toponyms in legal arguments as evidenced in judgments passed by the High Court, the Supreme Court and the National Green Tribunal, it is possible to prove that the juridical field of environmental law in Goa is gendered. Maybe we can skip this as well. And the central research question, like I said, the questions that I had in mind when I was doing the analysis of each case was, what are the various dimensions of power evident in the juridical field and how are they involved in the creation of gendered violence? If yes, how? What are the hierarchies that exist within the juridical field? How do instances of symbolic capital and symbolic domination manifest in toponymic disputes? Is there a gender dimension and what does it look like in an environmental case? And I'll explain about the 4 quadrants in a bit. We can skip this as well. So the process is, you take a case, the first thing you do is you define what the juridical field of environmental law is. Basically, you identify the key actors in the case. So the key actors could be government agencies, environmental courts, legal professionals, NGOs, corporates, or the affected communities. Then you analyze the distribution of capital. Like I said, identify which institute has what kind of capital. The corporates have economic capital. The state government has symbolic capital because of the authority that they have. Goa Foundation and NGOs come with cultural capital because they bring their research, their knowledge, their in-depth understanding of the field, and how each one uses their capital to negotiate for power within the juridical field while trying to win the case. Then you study the habitual practices. Like I said, how do the different professions or the different actors, how have they benefited because of their habitus, because of their socio-economic, cultural, political affordances and privileges. Then it is about examining symbolic power and legitimacy. Like, how do certain actors have greater access to institutions of power and certain actors do not? Then what is the role of the state and how do the power relations between the government, the legal institutions and other actors play out? And finally, analyzing what kind of social reproduction and change can likely take place because of this case, whether the environmental laws or whether the arguments put forth in the case are going to uphold the inequalities or they are going to help in contributing to environmental justice. So this was the process that was followed for analyzing each of the 17 cases. This is a sample. If we have time, I will discuss it later, but I think I want to focus on the findings. So we can go forward. Next one. So the conclusions through the analysis of all of these cases, the conclusions that came were, except for a few instances that are mentioned in my case analysis, there is no explicit evidence of overarching gender in the juridical field of environmental law based on the way that I categorized it alone. Now this can seem a little underwhelming, but I promise you there is a good reason for why this has happened. A lot of weightage is given to the decisions taken by, so for example, within these cases, these are some of the conclusions that the conservator, the deputy conservator of forests, these positions typically and historically are held by men. These positions within the juridical field of environmental law are therefore in that manner alone inherently gendered, because for decades together, men have been guiding the environmental agenda. Men are in the position of power to decide, what's right and what's wrong, when the ones who are affected the most are women. The committees that are set up, so for the forest, there's the landmark case, which is what is it called? It's just escaping me right now. It's regarding the court's orders that the boundaries of the forest and forest areas have to be identified. And in order to identify these forest areas in each state set up their own committees. So even the committees, the Sawant committee, the Kapoor committee, the Karapulkar committee, all of these committees are headed by men. Most of the people in the committee are men. The committees are named after the men, which is again an inherent gendering in the process in which solutions are approached. There continues to be a gendered use of pronouns. Even when talking about general public, within the cases, one can see that it's always about, when they're referring to general public, it is he who is going to do it, or he will have no legal right, or his agent, or his dump, irrespective of the actual gender of the person. And yes, one can argue, but that's for convenience, that, we just say, himself instead of themself or herself. But it is exactly these things that perpetuate the stereotype and the notion that what is normal and convenient is masculine, and for anything to be feminized, it needs to take some extra effort, which people are not willing to put in. Lawyers often refer to female judges as sir and my lord even today, which is why, again, it can be argued that inherent maleness that perpetuates a certain stereotypical idea of the requirement of patriarchy to be the dominant force within the juridical field is what happens all the time, and that's evident throughout. So, for gender disparity or gendering to prominently feature within the juridical field of environmental law, it would require that the differential impact that these laws or these provisions have on women be acknowledged. Now, every field has its limitation, and as I understand, again, the experts are here, so feel free to correct me or to add, within the way that our legal system works, because of the common law, there are precedents that guide how judgments will be made or how cases will be analyzed by the people in power, and it is these precedents that will be used to, sort of guide future decisions. So unless and until there is a precedent, it will be very difficult to argue on the basis of something that doesn't exist. And that's exactly what's happened with ecofeminism. Because there aren't enough studies on ecofeminism in Goa, because it doesn't exist in our juridical framework, it doesn't exist in our legislative framework, the lawyers cannot really argue when they are arguing in court about mining should be stopped because women will be impacted in all of these ways. It's good as an academic discussion, but in the absence of there being a proper way in which an ecofeminist lens can be integrated into the legislation, into the judiciary, a judge cannot take up an argument which is outside of the legal ambit. And that is why I was desperately looking for instances of gender. And I'm like, hey, gender is never mentioned. Itself in its entirety having a gender blind lens, how will they ever be able to reveal all the inconsistencies and inequalities and gender disparities that exist? It's almost like if can't talk about it, it doesn't exist. And that is what the problem is, because within the juridical field, gendering is not spoken about. It almost seems as if it doesn't exist when there is enough and more mounting evidence by the day that it absolutely very well does. And that is where all of you come in, because each of you who is an expert in their own field, and this is a multi-sector study and we have representation from most of those fields, you can take back the idea and think about how within your own field an ecofeminist perspective can be injected so that it ends up reflecting in the law, so that it ends up reflecting in the way that judgments are made, in the way that processes are conducted. The system requires an overhaul. It's not about, like I said, this is not a critique on individuals or judges or lawyers or activists. No, it's a critique of how a system has evolved in such a way that it does not have any space for a conversation on gender-based impacts. And the need of the hour today is discussing gender-based impacts, because as ecofeminism tells us, environmental degradation and the state of women go hand in hand. Unless we empower women, unless we look at gender perspective, the environmental crisis won't get better. And unless we focus on that, the situation of women won't get better. So the future lies in acknowledging the nexus between the environmental crisis and the state of women, and coming up with policies and legislations that can allow for an ecofeminist lens to be used in decision making, in policy making, which is essentially called gender mainstreaming. I think we can, final thoughts is, again, these are all details of the case, which I do not want to sort of go into right now, but we'll be happy to, discuss with anybody who's willing to, engage with me on a conversation about this. And even when we look at, how the entire field, it's not just the juridical field. The juridical field is one of the fields that exists in a system of fields, and all fields have a very predominantly gendered aspect, and that reflects in the juridical field as well. So when we talk about, say for example, mining, about 20% of total women mining laborers are in the age of 15 to 19, 40% are women under 14 years of age. Women usually don't have access to mining jobs, and when they do, they are horrible back-breaking jobs, and because they are women, they are paid less than men for the same number of hours and the same kind of work that they do. Again, capitalism and patriarchy resulting in an unfavorable impact on women compared to their male counterparts. And we've spoken in details about, the double burden that the women bear. And even in construction, there is no provisions for proper toilets or sanitation for the women workers. And we have a huge women workforce in construction. And contrary to what people usually perceive, there is a lot of representation of women in construction. So, and like I said, it gets similarly reflected in the juridical field, where if we look at the percentage of the population of women versus how many women are actually in decision-making positions within the juridical field in terms of High Court judges, in terms of Supreme Court judges, it's a very, very small number. The representation of women is very small, and even in the fields in which women are represented, as we discussed earlier, their participation is very low. Their representation may exist, but it's nominal. Their participation is low. So, to sort of bring this conversation to a wrap, the way forward that in my head I envisage and would therefore like to share with all of you, because each one of you comes with such a rich knowledge, experience and perspective of your own, that you can bring that required nuance to take this work forward. So for example, ecofeminism currently suffers from a major problem, and that is it lacks an intersectional lens, where we are talking about the problems of women as if the problems of all women are the same. But that's not true. The problem of a woman who is from a socio-economically poor family is very different from the problem of a rich woman. The problem of a socio-economically poor woman who's also from a marginalized minority is going to be different from someone who's just poor. So there are these different intersections in our identities, and each identity, based on the components that inform the identity, describe what are the problems that are specific to that identity. So we cannot homogenize the experience of womanhood. We cannot say all women, yes, all women suffer, but all women don't suffer equally. So to understand how different sections of women, their sufferings are different, and intersectional approach is required to further nuance this study. There is an absolute urgency in trying to infuse gender mainstreaming into the creation of public policy. We have to start with engagement and advocacy, which is probably what we are doing. Hopefully this is the first step towards that. This is laying the foundation for the first step, which is creating engagement and advocacy and awareness regarding the fact that this issue exists. Then there is need to collaborate with the stakeholders such as government officials, legislators, advocacy groups, for building a support for proposed changes that are feasible, drafting policy recommendations. Ultimately, it will require legislative action. It is not something that can be taken forward without legislative involvement, without political support and involvement, a whole lot of diplomacy and negotiations, and then of course monitoring and evaluation. And sometimes, and this of course is a long-term plan. Things don't change in a day. They take sometimes years and you still don't see the change in your lifetime. But it's important to chipping away slowly. So even if the change is a small change, so for example, the Chief Justice of India, Justice D.Y. Chandrachud, a few months ago came out with a handbook. Now this is not a legally binding contract of any sort, it's a guideline. But he came up with a handbook that talks about how it is important to remove stereotypical speak within the legal field. How you cannot use gendered language in court anymore. How we need to remove gender stereotypes when we are talking about legality and law. And there is an entire handbook that he has facilitated to guide the people within the field to remove these gender stereotypes when they are presenting their points within the field of law. So even if it is something like that, which is not legislative, which is not legally binding, but a guideline so that people can start thinking from this perspective, a guideline, a framework that helps people understand the importance of an ecofeminist lens and how an ecofeminist perspective can be infused in the creation of policies around environment for the benefit of both the environment and for helping in the upliftment of the women that are disproportionately affected and marginalized further because of the absence of their representation and because of the presence of capitalistic patriarchy. So that was pretty much a very, very rushed but concise sort of discussion about my study that took place. It's a 300-page study, so my apologies if it seemed like I rushed through certain parts. If there are any clarifications required, I'm right here, very happy to engage. And thank you for patiently listening. I see so many faces that have been interested and that have given me the faith that my words have been, have not fallen on deaf ears, that my work is going to see the light of day, maybe not tomorrow, maybe not day after, but soon enough. So I really appreciate this opportunity, and with that, I'd like to say thank you and get the rest of the evening unfold.
Thank you, Dr. Sweta, for this fascinating study and an equally fascinating presentation. I think I'm not going to repeat, but I think there are a few critical areas maybe that we need to look at in more detail from the point of view of Goa. One is the toponyms, and there is a lot in terms of how the toponyms are gendered. Uh, in fact, a lot of this resonated with me because, for instance, when there was a golf course proposed in this very village, okay, Verna. So the thing is that they said the land is barren land. So when they said that land is barren land, it's like, okay, so no green is getting affected, green, because they don't go by aesthetics. So no green is getting affected. And then we actually asked the Directorate of Tourism, because golf courses come under the purview of tourism. So they said, yes, it's barren land, so we haven't, and so you don't need to do any environmental impact assessment. Second thing is, they said that what the water will be, they will not use the water from there, they will get it from somewhere. So the question is, where will they get the water from? They have to get it from somewhere, they're not going to get it from Savanwadi or somewhere else, right? They have to get it from somewhere else in Goa. So, but the strength of this lay in the groups getting together, making a very strong, forceful presentation to the local panchayat, and the local panchayat in turn presenting it to the Gram Sabha, and the Gram Sabha saying, we don't want a golf course in our village. And for these reasons, because this is not barren land, we take our cattle to graze, and we are, here comes the whole question of also the uses that people put the land to. Because very often when we talk of uses, we talk of, okay, this is settlement, so those again are another set of classifications, settlement, commercial, all these kind of zoning, but that doesn't take into account the kind of uses that the land is put to, and more specifically, the uses that the land is put to by women. So like you rightly said, for example, when it comes to traditional medicines, people, there are many tribal areas where women go to the sort of hillside there in their area, and they don't exploit the hillside. They go and remove how much they require for that for the person who's come for some help. So here is a different mode of functioning, and these modes of functioning, one is it needs to be inventarized, not only what uses they are put to, but how they go about it. They're not exploitative. It's not like a pharmaceutical company which will just, grab it all. So I think let's move on to one. What are the uses? What is the engagement of women? And again, as you rightly said, not just all women, but specifically to break it down. And what is the engagement of women with the environment? And what are the differential impacts? Yes. And what can we do? So it's really critical that we put it out there. What are the uses that people put to, and how they use it? Not just what uses, but how they use it. So this to my mind is critical, because otherwise we could also have a situation where, like you said, within women also it's intersectional. So women are not just women, but women have other identities of class, caste, ethnicity. All these identities are there, and these identities need to be recognized. And I would say we need to be intersectional in our approaches also, because very often we talk of environmentalism as though it were another field there, and genders there, and some other issues are out there, tribal issues are there. These need to converge, because, for example, other issues that are coming up. Today, the country is talking of uniform civil code. Now, when the first of them has already been, passed by the assembly, and you see that they have totally not considered community ways of holding land. And therefore, how will the inheritance be in the context of community ways of holding land? So it may seem like a very benign law, it's saying it's equal for everybody, but how will that translate in the context of a community has to be thought through. So these are all connected issues, because sometimes the narrative is created somewhere else, not necessarily in the environmental law. Similarly, also when it comes to let's say issues like okay, often we think that okay, communalism, we kind of attribute it to Hindus versus Muslims, Muslims versus Catholics, or etc. But I would just, at the cost of taking a minute, share with you a very interesting experience of the women of Mangeshi. They, they kept saying, we are sheep premis, whoever those people were. And they said, now the women of Mangeshi are Hindus. And they were objecting to anything being built on the hilltop, on top. So the thing is, what these people did is that, and they were keeping a vigil. Mind you, women are capable of doing this as well. So they were taking turns. And one day at night, at around 1 o'clock, these guys who call themselves Shiv Premis came with one big statue of Shivaji to put on the hilltop. Those women were, first of all, they went and together they pushed it. The other thing they did is they said, we are also Shiv Premis. But that doesn't mean to be a Shiv Premi, you should put one big statue on the hilltop, because they saw through the game of how communalism was being weaponized. So so that then you put the statue, then you say it's a tourist attraction, then you'll have a road to it. And then when you have a road going through it, then it's like, okay, now that means it can be developed. And because it can be developed, therefore you can, then you can have other development around. Like, some tourist resort maybe for people who come to venerate somebody. So you see, the narrative, that is how it's driven, it is seeming like some people are, what shall we say, fans of Shivaji, but they're not. They are weaponizing Shivaji to do their development. So these are like related, elements of power that perhaps we need to be aware of. Having said that, also, yes, so the question of representation and who can articulate is a critical area. Also, which are the sites of the jurisdictional field. Now, you have talked of the High Court, the Supreme Court, and the National Green Tribunal. But I think, I completely understand that you cannot cover the whole gamut. But there are other sites, like say something like this, where women approach, where women's groups approach the panchayat and ask them to and change, because you have to change the discourse, the tones of the discourse. Otherwise, overnight in the court, the judge is not going to listen to you, because he's not thinking on those lines. So you have to create that groundswell of that different discourse. So therefore, it's quite important to also look at various sides of in terms of the jurisdiction, is what I thought. And I won't take more time. I think I will call upon, since a lot of the studies relate to the Goa Foundation, I'll call upon Dr. Claude Alvarez to share what may have been the challenges in getting in the field being gendered, in not being able to address some of those issues. What are the challenges? And after which the floor is, and also what can be done, and after which the floor is open for discussion and also to our field questions to Dr. Sweta. So Dr. Claude.
Thank you, Vichya. First of all, all, let me say that I agree with her entirely. There's no issue in terms of the perspective that judges have on these issues. The Goa Foundation protected itself very early by ensuring that all its cases were argued by only by women. Our first cases were argued by Sweta in the Bombay High Court, an outstanding feminist, and till today, in my estimation, the best legal mind in the country. Nobody can match her in this case. And when we couldn't afford her anymore, because not that she charged us anything, but because we had to always pay the flight from Bombay and so on, and we had no money, we were broke. So I went into the ancient marriage contract and got my wife to get into legal, arguments purely on the basis of the contract. So in addition to housework and bringing up kids, we also had to argue these cases in the court. So it is as far as the Goa Foundation is concerned, it is very difficult to say that we were deficient in that sense, because we, as far as our argument was concerned, it was only left in the hands of women, and they are far superior to us. I mean, I will go to my wife with some, or to Indra Jaising with some argument, and she would say, "Oh, silly, we can't argue this in the court." Because, I mean, there are lawyers today, and they are all male lawyers, who will argue anything in court, because it's a fee, and they got a client. But these two women, whom I know, will not argue anything in court. First of all, because they don't get any money, so they don't want to waste their time on arguing some issue. But mostly because they said that if you want us to argue, we will argue only sensible law. We will not argue anything else. And don't come to us with very vague things, vague allegations and so on. You come with very specific things. Show where a law is being violated. Show where your fundamental rights is being violated. Give us examples, give us this, because they have got, the lawyers are far more exacting than even the judges. And there are, very often, I have a very good married life in every sense of the term. But sometimes it's more difficult to find time to talk to my own wife, because she gets involved in studying a brief. It takes 3 to 4 hours. And at that time, I am a client like anybody else. I got no special privileges. I also get shouted at. But what do we do about judges? And what do we do about 2 judges in the Supreme Court for women and 3 judges in the Bombay High Court for women? I mean, it's ridiculous. I mean, the women are, as I said, my own personal experience, they are far superior in legal arguments. They are far better, they are less corrupt in every sense of the term. They are willing to work long hours to write their judgments and so on. And yet we only promote men. Now, how do we break the system? You can't come to a Goa Foundation for answers. That's not our job. And as a general citizen, we can add our clamor to the chorus and make some more noise and say that, or maybe we can say that we don't appear anymore before the Bombay High Court unless they have 50% judges. I mean, Panchayat has got 30% women. Why can't a High Court have 30% judges? And it's not on the basis of quality or anything that this is happening. It is only patriarchy. It may not be capitalist patriarchy, because the way judges are appointed in this country, there is some capitalism. There are judges who are husbanded into the legal profession by corporates. But there are a lot of other judges who are appointed as judges, whom we know from personal life, who are very simple people, men and women, who are, who come to their job with a certain amount of dedication and do a good job and retire and they have done a good job. And listen to people and pass appropriate orders. If they are wrong orders, there's an appellate forum to go and to appeal to it and so on. But nonetheless, the procedure, at least in this country, it is getting vitiated. Nobody is not saying it's not getting vitiated. More and more judges who are now part of the Hindu Rashtra concept are being appointed. And some very vague judgments, even in the Ayodhya judgment, if you look at the last judgment, which is, judgment was not signed by anybody, but one judge did sign for his name, and it is appalling to think that a Supreme Court judge would write like this. There are many other judgments which are coming out now, which would be unthinkable earlier. So we have to look at it from that point of view. That's something we can't help. Even the United States, all the judges are appointed by if they are Republicans, they appoint all Republicans. If they are Democrats, they appoint all Democrats. So it's a problem that the common people face when they go. But the system is not going to change. And in the environment field, the system is not going to change at all, because environmental issues are not really women's issues. They are issues of everybody. Whether you breathe bad air in Delhi, you're not going to be suffering more because you're a woman. If you are a child, you're going to suffer more because you're going to suffer for the rest of your life. All environmental issues are public interest issues. Women will suffer, men will suffer equally well. Now, there are general theories, and Dr. Sinha has relied upon them to show that there is a problem with many of these perspectives. They end up in the end aggravating the condition of women. But as she herself readily showed, when mining was going on, there was a problem for women. When mining stopped also, there was a problem for women. But there's no essential connection really between the two, because those women could have been employed in some other industry which would also have to be closed down. So I don't think those connections are very precise from what I could see. And I did not have the benefit of analysis of even a single case of the 17 to be able to say, well, what exactly was lacking in that case. See, as litigants, we have to be very practical. If you go to a court with 17 issues, they will still deal only with the first issue, because it's about whether you succeed or not. Now, this case that we fought last week about zoning in the High Court. Now, there were two issues there. One was in the power of the government to issue a circular after the plan has been withdrawn. They issued a circular, they withdraw the ODP, and then they issue a circular saying that, well, you can grant permissions as per that ODP. So we said, oh, this is ridiculous. I mean, which common person would even think like this? But I mean, government servants think like this. Common people will not think this. They have a plan, is withdrawn, it's gone. How can you give permission based on that? So we went to the court and we had other agendas with us. We wanted to bring all the corruption that had taken place, with Michael Lobo and all these other fellows who had actually designed the outline development plan with a coloring pencil and said this one will be red, this one will be blue, this one will be this, according to, and including their own plots. They had marked for settlement purposes, agricultural fields they had thrown in this. So we said we want to show that. So at some stage in the proceedings, Mr. Alvarez tried to bring that in also. She said, but you must also look at this. So then, of course, the judges are always very wary. They don't want to go into corruption issues because there's no end to it. I mean, other issues there's some end. I mean, somebody has not been promoted, you decide whether he's been properly promoted or not, you pass an order and that matter is over. But corruption issues, if you bring up one corruption issue with the court will be doing nothing for the rest of their life only dealing with corruption issues. So they don't want to touch it. So they said, why do you want to go into all these issues? You are already winning on this, on the issue, the legal issue. If you are succeeding on the legal issue, don't bring up all the other issues, because it's not necessary. See, they are very economical in the way they decide matters. Because we are not here to decide 20 issues. We get many clients who come to us and say, I've got one problem. And they start with that one problem. After you have spoken, they say, but there's one more. Then after you have finished, they say, but there's one more. And then they go on. They've got 5 or 6 hidden agendas. Because you give them one step inside, they come to the whole door with their elephants and their cows and everybody and park inside there. So you say, sorry, courts are also like that. They say, we will deal with this one issue which you have raised. Maybe you have raised 5 or 6 different arguments. We will deal with those arguments separately. They'll call it argument number 1, argument 2, issue number 3, issue number 4. But they're all related to that. And they'll kick you out. That's the way the judges operate. So if you now file a petition, which is an environment petition, and also a gender petition, and also an animal welfare petition, and also all that, and you will be kicked out in the very first day. They say, what sort of a wild animal have you brought in front of us? We are not used to this. You deal with what you are qualified to do. What is your interest? You are an environment organization. Yeah, you deal with environment. You don't come to us with other economic arguments. And always the forte of the Goa Foundation has been because we only concentrate on environment. Now, I am a normal human being like all of you. I get very upset when I see child sex tourism in my state. And people come to me and say, what have you done outside? They don't want to do anything. Now, because I do something on environment, I'm supposed to do everything. I'm supposed to deal with child sex, I'm supposed to sex tourism, I'm supposed to deal with somebody's illegal houses coming up in this village. I'm supposed to deal with everything, and if I don't, that means I've taken some money from them. We are used to this. It's sort of this is going on all the time. The people who do something are always criticized. And the people who don't do nothing, they have got a lot of time, so they spend their time criticizing. It's not a, don't worry, we don't worry about this. But our speciality is environment focus. And that is why we are very effective. And when we file a petition, the court says, what is the environmental issue that you raise? Because courts are very serious about environment. And in an environmental issue, don't raise 15 trivial issues. Go, what is your main, where is the shoe pinching? You don't need to put it into legal terms. You don't need to go to French sociologists to do it. You need to tell them that you can't breathe, or that your skin is burning. You've got to tell them that your water is stinking. That's what they understand. You go to a judge with a dirty bottle of water and say, this is coming out from my well because the government is not, this is what the government is doing. You immediately look at it. Formalin, immediately he said, food, you cannot have formalin. Judges are very sensitive about this issue, but they want you to be sensitive and raise that issue first. So, Dr. Sena, we as environmental groups, it is not possible for us to raise gender issues. We are all in support. We are all in support with you. We are all in sympathy. And our first request would be send half the judges home and replace them with women. We have no problem at all. Same thing with the lawyers. I mean, considering the output of just 2 lawyers in the Goa Foundation and more than 350 cases, I would say better to invest in just 3 or 4 women. They'll take care of all your legal problems. You don't need 500 men folk in the bar. They're doing nothing. They're only having good meals, enjoying themselves, buying fancy cars, and cheating people most of the time. So let's get rid of the men. I have no problem. But as an environmental group, I have a problem because first of all, we have no expertise. But more importantly, judge is going to find me saying, why you are getting meddling in all this? You are an environmental organization, aims and objects are there. And now Mr. Modi has got this new thing of sending the FERA, I don't receive foreign funds, but he's got this new thing of sending income tax to house. And the income tax says, where in your aims and objects are you supposed to do this? Now, this is the limit. I mean, never thought somebody would come aims and objects and find out whether you can do this aspect of the law and that aspect of the law. They're checking everything. Forget about your bank balances. They're checking even your aims and objects to see whether they can stop you from doing anything. Now, the Goa Foundation has been able to do all this because first of all, we don't want money, we don't receive money, and we are just free individuals who want to make a difference. And so the government doesn't know what to do with this because they can't organize a raid. The CBI will want to come, but they'll probably end up giving us money rather than like find out because they won't find anything in the cows. So what do you do with these type of individuals? And that's what we try to encourage youngsters to do. Please get out of this money chakkar and start doing things with your own minds and put your energy into this. There's lots of, we are classic examples. I have a boy brought up in Bombay. Simple middle class parents. I came to Goa. I married a lovely woman. She was, we settled down here. We built a new life, and we started off from scratch. We have no godfathers. Our children have no godfathers. But we used only our minds, dedication, only on environment work. We said we would do something about it. We don't want to make a mark in the field. We are not interested in making a mark. We don't want to get awards. We refuse awards systematically. But we want to use our minds because this is the planet on which we live, and we have given rise to 3 young boys. They are now, of course, Hulks, 40 years old and all. But we don't want them to also be part of this gentle activity which the population is engaged in, destroying every bit of nature that we have, and certainly not in the state of Goa. That is our simple commitment. We don't want anything else. We don't get into discussions and anything else. But this is our main focus, and I would encourage youngsters to get out and do it. And if they are women, then to bring that focus always to the attention of their work, whatever they are doing, to focus on it. If I had done eco-feminist work, I've always been dreamed of being a woman, but if I had done ecofeminism, I would have done equally good work as I've done in environment law. But I'm saying, it is something that has to be done by people, by men, by women, by everybody. And we have to get rid of this rotten patriarchy. There's no two ways about it. It has to be broken back, and that's why I go and support all women's struggles. These remarkable women in Bhalpoi who could get rid of Vishwajit Rane and get rid of that silly IIT campus which does no good at all in most parts of this country, and get rid of it and throw it out from there. You're right. They don't have PhDs, they don't have MAs, they're not educated, they are facing Vishwajit Rane is the most powerful feudal landlord in that place, and they tell them to get out, and they have to get out. I mean, that's the courage of women. And that whole agitation was women folk, no men folk inside, very few men folk inside. And you look at these things, then you know that judiciary is also not required to solve environmental problems. We have a strong women community, strong women in the community, they can solve any problem. Why do you need to go to judges? Why do you need environment law? These problems have to be solved at the level of the community. And there is where the battle takes place. And there is no mediation. We don't want all these MLAs and MPs and chief ministers and prime ministers. We don't want them. Because we are living there, we are interacting with people. We know all the women in the village, and everybody knows it. So it's a different arena altogether. So let's not also get involved too much. I keep telling my friends, don't get into law. There was a young girl, I think this girl's daughter is in the car. I was trying to poison her mind about lawyering because it's not a profession which has got any future as such. Because all the environment laws now are being removed. After that, there is no environment law to argue the pace at which the laws are being amended. But sorry for going on like this. I've exhausted my 10 minutes. And I want to say thank you very much. And please, I may not have given you exactly what you wanted to hear, but you didn't give me what I wanted to hear. So I bypassed the issue altogether, and I hope you don't mind. But
I didn't happen to write it for you, so I understand
Yes.
that it didn't
Exactly.
meet your expectations.
Exactly. So thank you very much for listening to me and for my diagram.
I'm sorry, but in the interest of having spent 4 years of my life working on this, even at the cost of sounding defensive, there are things that I need to say. First things first, this was not a legal study. This was not meant for the legal profession. This was meant for the sociological understanding, the anthropological, economic understanding of how intersections of gender and environment and power dynamics work together. Second, I appreciate the feedback received, and I have taken that into account. Ecofeminism is not something that I have come up with. There are enough papers and enough empirical evidence and research that shows the nexus between environment and women. Yes, environment impacts men and women, but it impacts women differently. That's not an opinion, that's a study. There are multiple studies and it's been proven through empirical evidence. Also, it's not that environmental crises only impact women. The basis of ecofeminism is a little more nuanced. It talks about how capitalism and patriarchy both impact women and the environment together. So we must keep that in mind as well. And I still really hope, I understand that different people have different perspectives to solving a problem. And that's great because it's in conversations like these that we realize that there is a necessity for multiple perspectives to come together and to sort of critique the bases and the foundations of each other. Being a multi-sector communication scholar, irrespective of whether a judge will want to listen to Pierre Bourdieu or not, a communication scholar would. And so the framework was based on that. And like I said, I'm sorry at the cost of sounding defensive, I do believe that ecofeminism is very important and it is extremely crucial to kind of have an ecofeminist perspective when we are discussing about environment going in the future. And maybe an hour wasn't enough time for me to take you through the tenets of my study. Besides, I didn't think this was my viva for my PhD. I genuinely thought I was trying to introduce a concept. But I really hope that if you have the time and the patience to go through my dissertation, when you go through the 300 pages of the work that has gone in, it may be give you some idea and maybe be able to convince you otherwise. Never was a lawyer, have no plans of being a lawyer, so not going to try to convince you with my words, but I hope I'm able to convince you with my work. That said, thank you so much, everybody. I really appreciate all the inputs that I have received and all the knowledge that I will be taking back, all the learnings that I will be taking back from this experience. Thank you so much.
Would anyone like to ask a question or add a comment? Or look into what kind of studies that require to be done, further studies that require to be done, to kind of build a groundswell of certain narratives, which then won't make it difficult to bring it up and be focused in the High Court or the Supreme Court or the National Green Tribunal. Yes.
Right now in Goa, we have got 39 Only 1 minute. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Right now, election is around the corner, and we have got 39 plus 1 jokers who are running Goa. We need the woman to take over at least some seats. The reason is, at ground zero, I have noticed women doing a very good job. But the men, most of them, are corrupt. And it is how we find at ground zero level, or me being a Christian, women playing a major role. So we need badly women representation. So I would just ask for your detailed inputs to be given to the audience where women can penetrate the assembly. Help them with your advice. Thank you.
Maybe we'll take a few more questions and then if there are any more questions, we'll take a few questions and then we'll put it together. Questions, comments, responses to various, because she's covered a whole vast terrain.
I think one thing that comes out clear from this evening's presentation and discussion as well is that the role of research. A lot of our conversations on these very important matters, they're not well grounded. They simply become slogans and shouting and making noise. And they don't stand the ground, they don't disappear. One of the things that Sweta, Dr. Sinha's study points out is, if your argument is well researched, you stand the ground. You don't need to shout. We don't need to make noise. We can simply get people. Other thing is, this kind of conversation on this kind of topic is not for marketplace. It calls for pondered, sobered, thoughtful discussion, thoughtful conversation. And I think we don't have that kind of culture where we can sit around a table and robustly engage into this kind of conversations. Unfortunately, we tend to yell and scream and shout and do some slogans. That is not going to take anywhere. I would be strongly encouraged, and I'm very much heartened by Dr. Sinha's study, because as earlier someone who is familiar with her study mentioned, someone from Goa, that for the first time we have a researched study. We have a solid research in our hand. And hopefully the judges will make use, and the lawyers above all, will make use in the argumentation of this research. Most of our, I've read as part of being the guide and mentor of our dissertation, I've also done my own study because I'm interested in this ecofeminism. And as I indicated in my opening remarks, that it becomes a kind of a conversation. I mean, kind of a simply chat, not even conversation, chatting about this. But it calls us to, I think, to take seriously and engaging ourselves in doing research. So I would really like to encourage the graduate students, meaning master students and bachelor students, to invest yourself in researching if we want to save the world, if we want to save Goa, particularly from the point of view of environmental issues. Without research, I don't think we're going any further. So thank you for this. And I thank you very much for giving us that map how to proceed and make a significant difference in the whole thing. Thank you.
Any other questions before or comments comments in terms of any thoughts also of how we can take this ahead? Thinking, yeah.
I am from the village of Betapati, and we are facing a lot of issues at the moment in terms of water shortage and pollution of water. Our lakes have been polluted. Our sea also, there is some pollution. There was an article in newspaper saying Kolva beach sea water was polluted, and we are close to Kolva, so I assume that Betapati also is the same. So, but it is such a struggle when we have all these, everything is there right before our eyes, but how do we protect, how do we go forward in protecting our villages? It's not happening, there's no cooperation, we have to go higher like courts, and that is taking a lot of time, and finance also is very high. So we are struggling, the villages are struggling. So we need some guidance, like a group which can help us to proceed. Like we have biodiversity groups and VDC groups, but it's going very slowly. By the time we reach somewhere, I think everything will be already destroyed. So I think guidance on that will be helpful.
Thank you.
I also want to say about the projects coming up in the villages. There are a lot of projects coming up, and that is another struggle. So we need someone to help us on that as well.
Thank you so much for your considered questions. And to begin with, I am a mere researcher. I wish I had any kind of actual power or any actual capacity to be a decision maker, but think of me more as somebody who shows the light and illuminates the path so that the ones who have the power can walk on it. That said, a lot of these problems from my humble perspective are, like you mentioned, multi-sectorial problems, where it is, if each individual tries to, or if each unit tries to solve it, it will take so long before you come up with a solution that probably it will be too late. So this is perhaps not something that can be solved by the environmentalist alone, or by the legal fraternity alone, or by an activist alone. It requires the coming together of all of the people from these different disciplines to ponder together and then arrive at a solution. And because I'm an academician, like they say, if you go to a neurologist and tell him your symptoms, the neurologist will tell you it's a problem with the brain. If you go to a cardiologist, the cardiologist will try to find out if the problem is with your heart. So similarly, I'm a scholar and I'm a communication scholar, so my solutions tend to come from a communication basis. which is why I believe that having more conversations, it's a long step. It's not going to change overnight, and that is the biggest frustration of people who work in this field. When there are people here who are present, all of you who have done so many more years of work than I have, so you all know much better than I do the amount of patience and tenacity that it requires for you to see even a slight shift. But I think awareness and conversations are a great starting point. One step ahead of that would be bringing people from multi-disciplines together to come to a combined solution, so that if there is if there is politics, if there is legislation, if there are lawyers, if there are activists, all of them come together to the drawing board and come up with a solution. It will be much more effective and sustainable, rather than individuals in their silos trying to solve the problem. And a very good way of combining people and bringing them together is through conversations, discussions, symposiums, conferences, dissemination of research work that is rooted in empirical evidence, not just opinions. I think that's a good starting point. And like I said, because I'm a communication scholar and not a lawyer, not otherwise in the environmental field, my solution will come from that perspective and that lens. I don't know how helpful that is, but I think that bringing together multiple minds from multiple disciplines and arriving at a comprehensive, cohesive, collective solution is probably the way forward to solve, each of these issues. And as far as your question is concerned, I am in complete agreement with you when you say that there has to be a greater representation of women. There has to be a greater representation, within whether it's the judiciary, whether it's in politics. But I think representation and participation is the outcome of empowering women in the first place. A lot of groundwork before that has to be done. Where women are sort of empowered, they are given that kind of cultural access to having a voice. Even though there are so many women that are educated, there are so many women that have degrees. I'm not even talking about the ones that don't. They are educated, they have degrees, but they don't have the social sanction to have a voice. So I think if we first start changing the way we look at what we expect from women. A man decides to go out and make a bold statement and talk loudly, and he's considered someone with determination and with a fierce personality. A woman does the same, that very instant she's labeled arrogant. These are the stereotypes we have in our mind, which is why women not only have a problem accessing spaces of power, even if they access spaces of power, they're not given the platform to voice their opinions. So the groundwork has to start a lot earlier, whereas culture as society, if we can create more awareness about empowering women, respecting them for the expertise that they bring to the field, and taking into view what they, what they believe and giving them that voice, they actually have a voice, hearing their voice. A lot of people say women, don't have a voice. No, women have a voice, but who's listening? So if we can start listening first, eventually, again, these are unfortunately very long drawn out changes, but eventually as more and more women are empowered and men and women work together in making sure that women's voices are heard, the representation and the participation of women within the legal, the political fields will hopefully improve. This was an oversimplification, I understand, because there are too many factors that inform and influence participation and representation of women. These are some of the crucial ones, though I completely understand that this is neither an exhaustive list nor a detailed one. But it's a good place to start thinking from. I don't know if that answers your question again, but yeah, I think before we give them representation, we need to give them empowerment.
Thank you. if there are no more questions, then I will call upon Professor Elsa to also share her thoughts and also, give the concluding remarks.
Good evening, everybody. My respects to Dr. Sinha for the presentation. She shared with us her analysis. I acknowledge and respect my respects to all the experts who are there and the audience. I'll keep it short because we've kind of crossed 5 o'clock. Environment is very close to all of us when we call ourselves goals, and we all acknowledge this. But there was a filter which Dr. Sinha brought to us, and that filter was to look at environment through a lens of ecofeminism. And the analysis is revealing to us that if environment is getting affected, it is disproportionately affecting a particular gender. That's the revelation that is in front of us. And possibly the gap between what we are already experiencing with environmental issues or all other issues for that matter, the gap is how does this revelation help us handle our practical issues in a better way. That's the gap. And possibly to connect the two, to my mind, would be to say आमचे चलता ते वाटेर इलोसो उजवाड घातला. वाट आमची आसा, चाल आमची आसा, पण ते चालेचेर इलोसो उजवाड या एनालिसिसाचो we can consider. And that uzwad, that light, can reinforce us to look at all our analysis specifically whether they are disproportionately affected, and if they are, how we can equitably reinforce the situation. So maybe these are the new thoughts in this line. To my mind, I actually looked at the title of our organization again through this lens. And I was happy that it was inclusive. Yeah? Even the thought of understanding whether the researcher here, instead of Dr. Sinha, Dr. Sweta Sinha, if the researcher was a male and making the same presentation, would it make a difference? Was a thought which crossed my mind. Now these are all that we have to assimilate, we have to comprehend, and we have to find our way forward. So I leave you with all these thoughts. I'm sure there is value addition at every level to every situation because it's a multidisciplinary area. On behalf of Gonche Fulle Pilge Khatir and on behalf of, I'll take the position for the Salgaonkar College of Law as well. I thank each and every one of you. I thank especially Dr. Sweta for being very generous in sharing her research with us. I thank Dr. Claude for providing us his views and providing actually all the possible areas of further research. And these are all new areas. I thank Dr. Albertina for being, she mentioned to me, she's down with a bad cold, but she's been very generous even in her views, in supporting the event today. I thank Dr. Father Paul Max Ferreira, Dr. Basilio Monteiro. Just one note, I would want to drop the title DR, Doctor, against my name, which has been attached. I'm still an architect and we have still the AR. I've not reached the D still. Yeah, so that's a little clarification. So thank you very much. Yeah, let's call it a day.
I cannot allow a woman. Okay, all said and done, we are very grateful to all of you. I'm not taking the names and making it bigger thing, but I would like to especially acknowledge the presence of students. Students of St. Joseph Vaz College are here. I think students from Kamal College are also here. Okay, students from Goa University are also here. There are some professors also from the colleges. Our college, St. Joseph Vaz College, there is a professor. I'm also here. And of course, the uzwar that has been given today from your side, from her side, and from all the sides, and in between the uzwar of this hall was also giving us signals that you need to have more uzwar, and sometimes it blinks. But no problem, even if it blinks, it makes us understand that difference between light and darkness. How it is, how we could see Sweta when she was in darkness, and when the lights were coming on, you were shining. So thank you all of you for being part of this wonderful event, being part of this generosity, and in a special way I would like to thank Dr. Claude Alvarez for being here, although he had so many other things to do, so many other things to run yet, and yet he is here to be with us. And as you move out of this hall is a beautiful hall provided by PCCE, Padre Conceição College of Engineering, and Father Agnel has been very kind to us. As you move out, there's another room right besides this hall, and there are some beautiful mouth-watering refreshments that are kept for us. So please serve yourself. There is nobody to serve you. Serve yourself, and as you move, please carry the uzwar that has been given today. Thank you once again, and thank you. Last thank you to Vijayapur Kadir, Salgaonkar College of Law, and also we have Father Savio from Council for Social Justice and Peace. I thank each and every one of you, and please proceed to the refreshing room, very next to this. And the dignitaries, don't forget to carry your pots. Goodbye, Chikaliyu Pharmacy.
Do we keep it recording? To record this? Yeah, live. Finish, right? It will take time. Ending live broadcast. So now it's recorded? Thank you very much. Watch it for 30 days and then delete it. I see, okay. You can watch it for 30 days. I'm sorry. Okay. And as well. That was very good remark, really.
Yeah, Father.
Very good. Come, Basil.
Yeah, Basil. अरे यहाँ ऑफिस आन दो तुम्हारे
क्या लेंगे ऑफिस आन दो
जेएफपी के ऑफिस आन दो
They're setting up the library space for today. I'm sure it's available.
No, definitely I understand. And